The biggest risk for Parkinson's may not be in hospitals, it may be in your home. In this conversation, Dr. Ray Dorsey shows how tiny daily exposures, from your water to your cleaning products, impact the brain, and the small habits that can protect your health for life.
Hello and welcome to the Open Your Eyes podcast. I'm Dr. Kerry Gelb, the host of the documentary Open Your Eyes. If you're new here and you like our interviews, press like, subscribe, share, and hit the bell to get notifications of great new interviews. Also, please leave comments. Great news, you can now watch our full-length documentary, Open Your Eyes, on Amazon Prime, Apple TV, iTunes, Google Play, and YouTube Movies and Shows. And also, please share your thoughts by emailing me at drkerrygelb@gmail.com. So people, that leads us to people have to take control of their own health. So what can we do without relying on the NIH or the government to come and help us? What can the individual do? Because I think if we wait for the government to try to help us, we're going to be waiting a long time because of lobbying money. That being said, I could be wrong on that, but that being said, what could be done to reverse, treat, or prevent it? What could the average Joe do that's listening to this?
So what do we tell if someone smoking is diagnosed with lung cancer? What do we tell them to do?
Don't smoke.
Don't smoke. Stop smoking. So when someone gets Parkinson's disease, what should we tell them to do?
Stay away from chemicals.
Stay away from chemicals. So what can you do in your everyday life to stay away from chemicals? So since writing this book, I've become I buy organic produce. Now I'm a physician, so I have the resources to do so, but organic produce is much cheaper than having Parkinson's disease. And then even for the produce I get, whether organic or conventional, I wash all my fruits and vegetables with both water and with a pesticide wash or vegetable wash, which is essentially soap. So just like I wash myself with soap and water, so you get rid of things that dissolve in water and things that dissolve in fat like oils, I do the same thing, so I can get rid of those fat-soluble pesticides and have them be washed away too. I have just a very big glass bowl, not big, like half-gallon glass bowl. I put my strawberries and berries and my apples or whatever it is. When I buy them, I put them in the bowl, wash them, and then I put them in the bowl, so that when I am ready to eat them, I just can eat them, and they've been pre-washed, hopefully getting rid of a lot of the pesticide residue.
With more screen usage and indoor time, myopia, also known as nearsightedness, is increasing and getting worse in children. Now, certified eye doctors can prescribe MiSight One Day, the first and only FDA-approved soft contact lens to slow myopia progression in age-appropriate children. Visit CooperVision.com to find a Brilliant Futures certified eye doctor near you. I was going to bring up exercise. Exercise, there's been a lot of studies to show that exercise decreases the risk.
Yeah, so exercise vigorous exercise can decrease your risk. If you exercise 3.5 to 4 hours a week, running, swimming equivalent, you can have you're associated with a 20% lower risk of developing Parkinson's disease, and exercise is immensely beneficial for people with the disease, whether it's anything from yoga to ballroom dancing, to Tai Chi, to swimming, to running, have all been shown to be beneficial. On the toxin thing, can I finish the toxin thing?
Oh yeah, please. I'm sorry.
So other things I do, I put a carbon filter on my water faucet at home. So this is just like from Pure Brita. I'm not endorsing any product here. But these carbon filters can remove pesticides and other chemicals in your water, perhaps even lower levels than already present. I just put it on my faucet and I change the filter, whenever the light goes red, once a month I get a new cartridge and put it on there. I mentioned I wear a helmet when I bicycle. I rarely dry clean clothes. When I dry clean, I use a dry cleaner that does not use perchloroethylene or trichloroethylene. These dry cleaners have a green leaf. These chemicals, when they're used in dry cleaning, can release gas into it. So when you put your dry cleaning, if you pick up from the store and you put it in your car, you are breathing in these chemicals as you're driving home. You put it into your closet at home, you keep the bag on, it does so. So if you're going to minimize your use of dry cleaning. If you use dry cleaning, use ones that aren't using perchloroethylene. And none of that still does, air out your dry cleaning outside before you bring it inside.
So if it says organic dry cleaner,
I would be worried about what their definition of organic is, because organic just means carbon-containing molecules. So I would be thinking, I look for this green leaf, and if you have any questions, ask them. Do you use perchloroethylene, often called PERC? in the industry. Canada, California is so concerned about their phasing out or have phased out perchloroethylene. The EPA proposed a ban on perchloroethylene, a phase out of perchloroethylene and a ban on trichloroethylene last year. You should tell your representatives that you want to make sure that that ban becomes permanent, so that that future generations and us in the future have less exposure to these chemicals.
How about stress?
So stress likely modifies or exacerbates Parkinson's. I don't think it's a primary cause of it, but it certainly, we know people who have stress have increased tremor, for example, and it likely increases the symptoms of it.
There's some studies that show that a Mediterranean diet can lower the risk by over 20%. If you could talk about that, there was a study with 130,000 health professionals, and it showed that it decreased the risk by about 22%.
This man has read the book. Thank you. That's a great compliment to me that you spend so much time in it. So thank you. I think what's important in diet may not be what's in the food, but what's not in the food. And so a Mediterranean diet is relatively low in animal products, higher in fruits and vegetables. And as you were alluding to, that these chemicals get sprayed on, into the water or on like vegetables, the pineapple chop, and then get concentrated as they move up the food chain. So I think the less animal products you eat, the less exposure you have to pesticides or other chemical toxins that are being concentrated as they make their way up the food chain. So I think it might be more important what you're not eating in terms of chemicals that are in those foods than necessarily the amount of vitamin D or vitamin E that's in the particular food.
Back to exercise, the theory is it increases BDNF.
Yeah. So what's the biological basis for the improvements that we see with exercise? So exercise releases growth factors like BDNF, brain-derived neurotrophic factor, that protect the remaining nerve cells that have been damaged. So that Dr. Bas Bloom, who I was speaking to before coming on your podcast, did a recent research study showing that connectivity between nerve cells is maintained in people who exercise with Parkinson's disease compared to those that don't. It may also be that exercises increases the mitochondrial functioning, the energy producing parts of nerve cells, and may make them more resilient to the effects of toxins in our environment.
Something I read in your book I thought was fascinating, that caffeine may be protective.
Yeah, so caffeine has a chemical in it that might be protective to nerve cells. These studies are really, really hard to tell because, it's hard to get really good diet history. I mean, who knows what they were eating 20 or 30 years ago, much less what they had for lunch yesterday. So there's some limitations that are inherent to doing the studies, but caffeine consumption might be beneficial for people with Parkinson's disease and might be decrease your risk of developing Parkinson's disease. Lots of mites.
And what's your stance on alcohol?
Alcohol is not good for nerve cells. So I don't drink very much alcohol. And if I had Parkinson's, I'd probably drink even less.
And green tea.
It might be beneficial, though really hard to do it. So I think lots of people in the community gets really upset. Why can't you give us better information on diet and the like? Because it's really hard to do the study. So like green tea, am I going to randomize people with Parkinson's to drink green tea and drink some other non-green tea and see what the effects are 5 or 10 years later? Really, really, really hard to do to some of these studies. So the reason we can't give you great answers to some of these questions is that it's really hard to answer that question. It doesn't mean it's not an important question to answer. It just means that the tools by which we have to answer these questions aren't sufficiently good.
I guess sometimes we could go with common sense.
Yes.
So, green tea.
That's what we try to do. Is there a biological reason or rationale? And the same thing for these pesticides. Like some people are like, well, can you prove that the pesticide does it? The vast majority of things in life we do without proof. We choose our professions without proof. We choose where we live without proof. We choose our spouse without proof. We choose what we have for breakfast, for lunch, what shirt we wore today without proof. We make many, many decisions throughout our lives without proof, but we use, what evidence we have and good judgment. I think the same thing we can do with Parkinson's disease.
if we practice medicine and we only could use randomized clinical controlled studies, we wouldn't be helping very many people.
We wouldn't be helping very many people at all.
So we have to use what makes sense and what's been used in the past and what we see that works and what see that doesn't, and know that a lot of the studies are funded, and who funds them makes a big difference with the outcome. And that brings me up to something that's interesting, that I believe this was in your book, about smoking. Smoking could be protective.
Yeah, so smoking has nicotine in it. Nicotine could be beneficial for some of these nerve cells. Now, no one should go out there smoking. There's also some concern that it could be the other way around, that people, as they lose dopamine producing nerve cells, may get less of a reward from smoking and therefore are more likely to stop smoking. And there's some evidence that that might be the case. So it could be that people with really early before they develop tremor, might be inclined to more readily able to quit smoking, so that the causation could go the other way. These studies would get really hard. It's like, you might say that studying improves your grades, right? So if you study, you get better grades, but it could be the other way around. You get good grades that might motivate you to study. These things that you might think one causes the other, sometimes it's the other it's going the other way.
And if I'm smoking while I'm studying, then maybe good for my grades. So you got to be really careful, and things have to make sense. And we talked about water filters before, and I thought that was interesting that you use a carbon filter, and I use a carbon filter on all the water coming into my house. And I also use a little extra protection with reverse osmosis, because reverse osmosis gets rid of arsenic, and about 10% of the water supply in the country have dangerous levels of arsenic that could cause serious disease. And I know reverse osmosis can get rid of arsenic and can get rid of fluoride, where just a carbon won't get rid of those types of things.
Yeah, so reverse osmosis is like, a steroid version, supersizing your carbon filter. A little more costly to do. If you can have it, probably a benefit. For the vast majority of people, carbon filter is probably beneficial. One important caveat: if you have a well, up to 1 in 8 Americans have a well, private wells. Those are not regulated by the Safe Drinking Water Act, and those are infrequently tested, and often only tested for bacteria to make sure there's no Giardia or other bacteria that might cause diarrhea illnesses. They are often not tested for pesticides. So if you have a well in rural areas, get it tested for pesticides. If you have a well in urban or suburban areas, get it tested for trichloroethylene and perchloroethylene. And in those cases, I would definitely be using a carbon filter or a reverse osmosis system.
I mean, and only half of the water companies have tested for arsenic. And because it's like $50 for them to test for arsenic and to save money. So, you definitely want to protect your water. I mean, it's not something that you could see. So a lot of times people don't think of things they can't see, but, water, you want clean water. I think.
Yeah. So, before I wrote the book, I used to think the water I drank, the food I ate, and the air I breathed was safe. I no longer think that.
And we talked a lot about air pollution. Let's talk about air filters. And they have a rating called the MERV, MERV rating. And if you could talk a little bit about that.
Dr. Gubb, you're coming to medical school, man, because you got to teach the medical students. So we talked about the dangerous effects of air pollution. Studies have linked air pollution to Parkinson's. A lot of studies, increasing number of studies, have linked air pollution to Alzheimer's disease. So if you don't want to get Alzheimer's disease, be very, very, very mindful of air pollution. So what are things that you can do to limit your exposure to air pollution? You can get air filters in your home that can filter out a lot of the particulate matter and filter out some of the gases that we talked about. My parents live in Southern California, so last Christmas they got air filters, and so they have like one in their bedroom and one in their kitchen. If you drive a car through lots of traffic, I'd roll up your windows and recirculate the air in your car so you're not drawing in the toxic air from the freeway into your home. Even for people with Parkinson's, high levels of air pollution have been linked to an increased risk of hospitalization. So And some of these things is not necessarily a fait accompli. The analogy I like to use, as we talked about earlier, is if you're a smoker and you get lung cancer, the first thing you're told to do is to stop smoking. And I think the first thing you should do if you've got Parkinson's or other brain disorder is to limit your exposure to these environmental toxins. Unfortunately, things like air pollution are really hard to manage outside of societal action. It's worth noting that we've done a great job. Air quality in the United States today is much better than it used to be. Anyone who was in Los Angeles in the 50s and 60s remember how toxic air pollution was. People wore masks not because of COVID-19, they wore masks because of the toxic effects of air pollution in the 50s and 60s. The governor of California in the 1960s said that we should eliminate all unnecessary driving. That governor was Ronald Reagan, who ended up becoming the first president to ever develop Alzheimer's disease after spending decades breathing in toxic air in Southern California.
And I think that people should know that the MERV number is the amount of particles that is being absorbed when it's going through the filter in your house, through your heater or your air conditioner. So I think typically around 11 is what which will filter out some of the smog. But people could look that up themselves and see if that is correct. But I believe I think you want 11 or 12. We want to avoid head trauma. You talked a little bit about that. Soccer players, football players.
Yeah, so it's just, I think it's pretty clear that head trauma is bad for your brain. It's whether it's ALS, whether it's Parkinson's disease, whether it's chronic traumatic encephalopathy, whether it's dementia. If you don't want these diseases, don't get hit in the head.
So here's something that may be a little controversial: is detoxification. I mean, and when I was a kid, we used to call it excretion. Now we call it now they call it detoxification. Sounds a lot more foo-foo, but we used to call it excretion. So talk to me about detoxification. Forget about the studies. Maybe there's no big study on it other than sauna and Alzheimer's, which I think we'll get to. But I want to talk about, just in general, does the concept of detoxification make sense to somebody who's a true scientist like you?
Oh, true scientist, my colleague might not say. In theory, yes. I think the challenge is that the damage could be done at a really, really young age. And so that I think we alluded to that these exposures could have been occurred in childhood. And so some of the stuff—
20 years, it takes up to 20 years to get Parkinson's, right?
Yes, and so it takes years for the disease to spread. It takes years for the disease to lead to a significant reduction in the nerve cells. For the disease,
60% of the nerve cells have to be damaged before you get symptoms, if that's correct.
So it may be that it's too late, but that still said, avoid ongoing exposure, reduce exposure going forward. There was a study looking at a chelator to take iron out of the brain in people who already had Parkinson's disease, published in the New England Journal of Medicine, but it failed, and it failed miserably. Not only did it not work, it made people worse. It removed iron from the brain, but the people with Parkinson's disease had progression of their symptoms more so than the placebo and had more adverse effects. So these things, there's no free lunch in medicine. So all medicines have side effects. There's no free lunch in medicine. Every medicine, whether it's aspirin or the most amazing surgery, has their adverse effects. So just be mindful of that. Unfortunately, as tempting as it is to get these toxins out of your brain, out of your system, we have no great studies that suggested that that's a benefit. And we have one major study suggesting that it can be harmful.
But
go ahead.
I was going to say, but that's with iron. I mean, if we increase the glutathione, which is the body's natural way to detoxify, that may be helpful. And, I know that you probably won't agree with this, but Dr. Perlmutter, who I know interviewed you, has a video. It's an old video where he does IV glutathione, and you see this miraculous change in these Parkinson's patients, but it doesn't last very long. And I'm just going to give this example from everybody's different. Everybody reacts to medication different and supplements. But I am going to tell you that and my father was getting a tremor. My grandfather died of Parkinson's, and I gave him liposomal glutathione from this company called Redizorb, Your Energy Systems. I have no affiliation with this company at all, other than I buy their product. And his tremor went away. And of course, that's an N of 1. And sometimes research studies have to start with an N of 1. But that's just something that I've seen happen.
And chelation does work for other diseases. So we know Wilson's disease, which is a disease of copper metabolism, chelation therapy is the way to treat the thing and have dramatic results. So the idea that, can you get rid of some of these toxic chemicals or toxic heavy metals from your body, has a merit to it. It's just that we don't have any great evidence for how to do that for Parkinson's disease.
And I want to bring up sauna. There's a number of studies on sauna on men who did sauna 4 to 7 times a week versus 1 or 0 had less Alzheimer's disease. And there's been a few finished studies on less Alzheimer's. And feel free to bash this. Tell me what you think about that.
Can I plead ignorance? So sauna is right, sweating. So it has to be. So what could be being released is only water soluble chemicals, and the real challenge for these things for brain disease is getting it out of their brain. And as you can imagine, and as you know, the brain has a pretty good fortress for not letting toxins into the brain, and it's hard to get things out of the brain. So I think some skepticism you might have from the general medical community around like sauna and the like for brain diseases is that are you affecting what's in the brain?
I think I didn't explain it. This is a 20-year study for people who've done it over 20 years, more for prevention rather than treatment.
Yeah, and I listen, if you're telling me there are ways to limit exposure to toxins and that limiting exposure to toxins might help prevent brain diseases, that wouldn't be a hard thing for me to get my arms around.
In your book, you mentioned fecal transplants, the microbiome. You got to tell me about that.
The man has read everything. So it turns out that the microbiome, the organisms that reside in our gut, well, I'll give you the stat of the day. And as you know, but your listener may not know, we're more bacteria than we are human. We have more bacterial cells in our bodies than we do human cells. And many of those bacteria reside in our gut, and they provide important biological functions for humans. And it turns out that the microbiome, the collection of bacteria that are present in our guts in people with Parkinson's disease, are different from those without it. And I think the study was done in rats, in which they looked at a rat model of Parkinson's disease. I think they took the fecal matter of a rat from the rat model of Parkinson's disease and put it into the non-Parkinsonian rat and gave the rat Parkinson's disease. Transmission of the disease from transmitting the bacteria in one person's gut to another, not one person, one rat's gut to another rat's gut, suggesting that the microbiome is likely an important modifier of the disease progress. I'm not so sure. I tend to think it's the toxins that are changing the microbiome. So if you eat lots of foods with lots of pesticides, you can imagine that you might change the microbiome. We also know that smoking changes the microbiome in our nose. It changes the microbiome in our gut. So these are what's causing what is a little bit unclear, and I think remains to be elucidated. But that the microbiome might be an important modifier of Parkinson's disease or other diseases, I think is quite a promising.
I like to see them go the other way, and see what happens.
Yeah, it could go the other way. And so they've done this for, I don't know if you, a little off topic, but there's a bad bacterial infection that happens in lots of patients in the hospital, C. diff, a Clostridium difficile. People who get too much use of antibiotics can get overgrowth of their gut with this bacterium called C. diff or Clostridium difficile. And you can do, I think you take transplants, fecal transplants of people with healthy guts into people who have sick guts, and you can make those guts healthy. So lots of work to be done in this area. But I think it's just another example that our environment, if you think about it, our gut is outside of our body, like our mouth, our gut, our GI tract is all really outside of our body. What things we bring into our body have important health consequences.
For lab tests, did anyone ever think about doing GGT tests on people that are getting Parkinson's, early Parkinson's, since it recycles glutathione? With the GGT test, you think would be very low?
I don't know. I'm not a glutathione expert. There are some things, some blood abnormalities. So people with Parkinson's might tend to have a little more anemia than other people. I haven't seen anything on GGT though.
Let's talk about conventional treatment, Cinemet, and tell me about your experience with conventional treatment, levodopa combined with carbidopa, carbidopa to decrease the side effects of GI problems. Tell me about that, and what have you found?
Dr. Gelb knows more neurology than any optometrist I've ever come into contact with, so kudos to you. So we talked about non-pharmacological ways of treating Parkinson's disease: diet, exercise, reducing exposure to toxins, protecting your head. So what about traditional conventional therapy? So medications are highly effective for people with Parkinson's disease, loss of nerve cells that produce dopamine. Levodopa, its brand name is Sinemet. It's used in combination with another medicine called carbidopa. Highly effective for people with Parkinson's, same drug that was shown in Awakenings. And the carbidopas prevent the nausea that's often tied to it. Since Dr. Gelb loves trivia, Sinemet came up because it means sine emesis, without vomiting. So that was the reason that the name Sinemet came up, because the carbidopa prevented the vomiting that was happening in levodopa. Even kind of alluded to, I think, in Awakenings, that people had a lot of trouble tolerating the medicine. So highly effective. There are a bunch of other medications that are a benefit. It can be a benefit to people with Parkinson's disease, but levodopa is by far the most effective. And then for a subset of people who have Parkinson's disease, have responded well to levodopa, have developed complications of the therapy, are relatively young, under 75, and are generally healthy, surgical treatments such as deep brain stimulation can be really helpful for people with Parkinson's. It can turn the clock back 5 to 10 years, let people function as they were functioning much earlier in the disease course. Even in really good cases, you can decrease your need for medications, and it's probably underutilized in the United States. But if you're going to get those surgeries, as you know, if you're going to get surgery done, you go to surgeons that do a lot of it, and people who can give you evidence of their track record and benefits and risks tied to this, because you're putting electrodes into your brain, and you want someone who does it a lot and someone who gets good results.
So what happens when they put the electrodes in the brain? What does it do?
So we talked about that circuit in the basal ganglia that's affected by the substantia nigra and loss of dopamine-producing nerve cells. At least parts of that circuit becoming inappropriately overactive, firing too much. And one area that fires too much is called the subthalamic nucleus, often abbreviated STN. So you pass an electrode into that target or other targets, and unclear reasons, but it dampens the amount of output from that nerve collection of nerve cells, and you can modulate it by adjusting the stimulation parameters. And when located properly, it's about the size of a pea, so as you can imagine, it's not very easy to do. When done properly, can have substantial benefits for people. But about 20% of people get some significant adverse effects, everything from bleeding in the brain to infection to pneumonia, and about less than 0.5% risk of death.
And how about the synthetic drugs as opposed to levodopa, which is an organic and more of a natural drug?
Yeah, so there are other synthetic dopamines that mimic the actions of dopamine. These medicines, like are called pramipexole or Mirapex, or Ropinirole or Requip, are commonly used. They're less efficacious. They have less benefit. They're less likely to cause the involuntary movements associated with levodopa, but are more likely to cause other side effects, especially impulse control disorder, which is compulsive gambling, shopping, eating, and sexual behavior. That is really quite disabling for people who are taking this. So if you have someone with Parkinson's disease and they're having those behaviors, you need to talk to your doctor, because that could be a function of the medicine, especially people getting these synthetic dopamines. Can also be seen with levodopa, but much more likely with these synthetic dopamines. And it's treatable because you can just reduce the medicine or eliminate the medicine, and many of these symptoms can go away.
How about inhaled levodopa? I know Michael J. Fox was involved in that.
So the Michael J. Fox Foundation has helped work with several pharmaceutical companies to develop more effective medications for Parkinson's disease and more effective formulations of levodopa. Some people will respond to levodopa quite well, but as the disease progresses, it gets harder and harder to get a robust response, and sometimes the response is delayed. So there are other ways to get levodopa into your bloodstream faster than having it go through your gut. And it turns out that inhaled levodopa could be one way that could happen.
You know, I have to ask you about the dopa beans, buccanapurines.
Buccanapurine. So it turns out that, as Dr. Gelb was indicating, that levodopa is a naturally occurring substance. And so it's an amino acid, just like, you know, building blocks of proteins. And so there is a plant called the velvet bean plant, or Mucuna purines is its genus and species, widely grown in India, that has high levels of levodopa that can be beneficial, especially for people who don't have access to levodopa. Levodopa is inexpensive, relatively safe, and highly efficacious. Many parts of the world don't have access to the medicine.
Being an optometrist, I'm interested. I saw in your book some of the things in the future, optogenetics.
Yeah, so can you control the functioning of genes with light? And it turns out that that might be the case. It's largely used in research studies right now, but you can turn on and turn off the firing of neurons by shining a light into the brain. Now, the challenge is getting the light into the brain, so a little bit hard to do so. To the eye, for example, but you have to, get to the right parts of the brain that you want to turn on and off. My colleague, Dr. Michael Oken, we're working on a sequel to our book, and he'll tell you more about optogenetics in the sequel.
And how about some of these are some, we're going into some things in the future, whole body vibration therapy?
Yeah, so it turned out Dr. Parkinson wasn't, when he described the condition, he didn't call it Parkinson's disease, he called it paralysis agitans, shaking palsy. And then in the 1850s, 40 years after Dr. Parkinson described the condition, the father of modern neurology, Jean-Martin Charcot, called it Parkinson's disease. He said, La enfermedad de Parkinson's, pardon my French, but he named the disease after him. And, they didn't have levodopa in the 1850s, but they had carriages. And he reported that some of his patients who had a good carriage ride with lots of vibration had improvement in their symptoms. So there have been studies looking at whether whole body vibration 170 years later might be beneficial for people with Parkinson's disease.
And there's something called the Therocycle,
The bicycle?
Yeah, the bicycle.
Yeah, so we told you that exercise is beneficial for people with Parkinson's disease. It turns out that my colleague in Cleveland, I'll remember his name in a little bit, has demonstrated that increasing the cadence, the speed at which you bicycle by force, by pedaling. He found this when doing a tandem bike with another person with Parkinson's disease. When he was pedaling faster, their Parkinson's disease appeared to improve. So it might be that forced bicycling at a faster rate than you normally can do by yourself might be beneficial for people with Parkinson's disease.
And as we're finishing up, I have to ask you my last question. How about marijuana?
So I was worried because Dr. Gallup, he could have got me something I didn't know anything about. So marijuana is likely beneficial. We know from chemotherapy, from people with cancer, that marijuana is helpful for nausea and helpful for pain. And that might be the true for people with Parkinson's disease, and it might be beneficial for tremor. That said, it's probably not a game changer. And as you can imagine, medicines that are psychoactive in older individuals who have a brain disease, should be treated with caution.
So people want to get involved in activism. What can they do to get Parkinson's, to help with the cause of treating Parkinson's, to get better research? What could the average person who's listening to this, what could they do?
One, they can join the PD Avengers. So it's a global grassroots organization organized by people with Parkinson's disease, led by people with Parkinson's disease, run by people with Parkinson's disease. You go to pdavengers.com, pdavengers.com, and you can join it. It's free to do so. I'm a PD Avenger, as are over 6,000 people in 90 different countries around the world. Second, you can tell your representatives to ban paraquat. Senator Cory Booker, whose father had Parkinson's disease, has a bill in the Senate that would ban paraquat and increase regulation of pesticides. You can tell your representatives and senators to get behind that bill, and you can tell them to ban trichloroethylene and perchloroethylene. Third, you can share your story. You can email me at info@endingpd.org, info@endingpd.org. I learn a ton from the emails that people tell me. You can tell me your stories about working with these chemicals or these pesticides, or your chelation story therapy, or you can tell me what I got wrong. I'd love to learn and love to hear from people. And fourth, you can buy our book. All the authors are giving proceeds of the book to prevent and end Parkinson's. All the authors are giving our proceeds to efforts to prevent and end Parkinson's disease. You can buy it on Amazon. You can get it in your library. You can buy it at other booksellers. And then if you can't afford the copy of the book, we will send you one for free. If you can't afford the copy of the book and you listen to Dr. Gell's podcast, email us at info@endingpd.org. Just provide us your mailing address, especially if you live in the United States, and we will send you a copy for free.
And that email that you gave before, is that the best way for people to find out more about you, more about Parkinson's, or is there another email for them to learn more about Parkinson's disease?
They can email me at info@endingpd.org, and then if our website is endingpd.org, and you can see some more content related to Parkinson's disease on our website. And you can subscribe for our newsletter at endingpd.org, free to do so. We have about 6,000 people who get information on Parkinson's disease. When new studies come out related to therapies or these environmental causes, we send you an update every week or so about Parkinson's disease. So info@endingpd.org is our email, website endingpd.org.
I want to encourage my listeners to join the cause and get Dr. Dorsey's book. It's a fantastic book. I read it cover to cover, and he allowed me to grill him on it. And before he throws something at me through the computer, I want to thank you for being my guest. You're a true gentleman, a great doctor. You're doing God's work. I have Parkinson's in my family, certainly something I don't want to get. And I really, God bless you for what you're doing.
And what a greater gift as clinicians than to create a world where the diseases we care for are increasingly rare, that we don't have these diseases in future generations, whether it's an eye disease or a brain disease. I can't think of a better thing that doctors can do for future generations.
Thank you so much, Dr. Dorsey, for your time and for joining me today. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Dr. Dale.
With more screen usage and indoor time, myopia, also known as nearsightedness, is increasing and getting worse in children. Now, certified eye doctors can prescribe MiSight One Day, the first and only FDA-approved soft contact lens to slow myopia progression in age-appropriate children. Visit CooperVision.com to find a Brilliant Futures certified eye doctor near you.